Interrupting is one of the most underestimated habits in communication. Many people do it without realizing. You might think you're simply being engaged, enthusiastic, or helping move the conversation forward, but to the other person, it feels like you've taken their voice away. When you interrupt someone, even slightly, you send a subconscious message that your words matter more than theirs. It's not always aggressive or rude in tone, but psychologically, it triggers a defensive reaction. People feel unseen, dismissed, or minimized, and over time, this creates distance. In conversation, people seek one thing above all else: validation. They want to feel heard, understood, and respected. The act of interrupting denies them that experience. It signals impatience, dominance, or lack of emotional regulation. Even if your intention is harmless, the impact isn't. Because human beings don't remember conversations word for word. They remember how they felt when they were with you. And if someone consistently feels cut off, they start associating you with frustration rather than connection. From a psychological standpoint, interruption often stems from an internal discomfort with silence or vulnerability. Some people interrupt because they're afraid of losing control of the conversation, while others do it because they equate quick responses with intelligence. But confidence is not about speed. It's about composure. Emotionally intelligent communication requires presence. It means being grounded enough to let someone finish their thought, even if you already know what they're going to say. Because in that space, you communicate patience, humility, and respect, qualities that draw people toward you rather than pushing them away. You can see this dynamic play out in subtle ways. Imagine someone sharing a story about their day, and before they finish, you jump in with, "Oh, that reminds me of when I..." And suddenly, the focus shifts to you. You might think you're relating or showing empathy, but you've just redirected the emotional energy of the moment. The other person may smile politely, but internally, they feel the small sting of being overshadowed. Multiply that over time, and it builds quiet resentment, the kind that doesn't show up in arguments, but in emotional withdrawal. They talk less, share less, and you wonder why the connection feels distant. Learning to stop interrupting isn't about being silent or passive. It's about mastering restraint. It's the art of holding space. Letting people speak without feeling the need to steer the moment shows immense self-control. It demonstrates that you value the relationship more than your urge to be heard. The most respected communicators understand timing. They wait, they observe, they listen, not just for words, but for meaning, emotion, and intention. When you pause before speaking, you give both yourself and the other person a chance to connect more deeply. There's also a quiet confidence in being the one who doesn't interrupt. People trust those who make them feel safe to express themselves fully. When someone speaks freely in your presence, they begin to associate you with comfort and psychological safety. That's how influence begins, not through dominance, but through trust. When you interrupt less, you create an atmosphere where people feel seen and valued. That's the kind of energy that makes others want to be around you. If you catch yourself interrupting, don't shame yourself for it. Awareness is the first step toward mastery. Try observing the rhythm of a conversation. When someone pauses, resist the impulse to fill that space immediately. Let silence breathe. Sometimes people need that small gap to find their words or emotions. When you jump in too fast, you not only take their moment, you take away the possibility of something meaningful being said. And when it's your turn to speak, do it with intentional calm. Speak clearly, but not hurriedly. Make eye contact, listen for tone, and respond with presence rather than impulse. This is how you shift from reactive communication to conscious communication. The goal is not to dominate, but to connect, not to win the conversation, but to elevate it. People remember those who make them feel heard. Interrupting robs you of that power. It's a small behavior, but it shapes how others perceive your character. Because underneath every interruption lies a simple message. What I have to say matters more. And when you replace that impulse with patience, you begin to speak from a place of emotional intelligence, not ego. Over time, people stop feeling guarded around you. They start trusting your silence, valuing your input, and respecting your presence. That's the quiet power of someone who knows how to listen. Oversharing is a habit that often masquerades as authenticity or vulnerability, but when unchecked, it quietly alienates people rather than drawing them closer. Human beings are naturally drawn to openness, to stories that reveal the depth of someone's experience, but there is a subtle distinction between sharing meaningfully and unloading indiscriminately. Oversharing happens when the emotional or personal content you communicate overwhelms the listener, creating discomfort, emotional fatigue, or a sense that they are being burdened with your inner chaos. It's not about what you reveal, but how much you reveal and at what pace. At the core, oversharing stems from a desire to be understood or accepted. You want to be seen in your entirety, without filters, because you believe that truthfulness equates to connection. Psychologically, this impulse often arises from insecurity or a need for reassurance. While this is natural, it becomes counterproductive when the listener is forced to absorb raw emotions or intimate details they did not consent to engage with. Unlike genuine emotional connection, which flows mutually, oversharing is unilateral. It asks others to carry your weight without giving them space to respond or relate. The result is subtle withdrawal, polite detachment, or even judgment masked behind courtesy. Think about a typical scenario. You might meet someone new and, eager to form a bond, begin recounting personal failures, relationship troubles, or private struggles in granular detail. On the surface, it may feel like trust building, but the other person may experience unease or even stress. Humans have an innate capacity for empathy, but it is not limitless. When conversations tilt heavily toward one person's emotional disclosures, the listener's own cognitive and emotional resources are taxed, and they begin to associate your presence with pressure rather than comfort. Over time, this pattern can erode genuine connection, even if unintentionally. The psychology behind this is rooted in social reciprocity and emotional balance. Conversations are relational instruments, their rhythm matters. When someone consistently dominates emotionally, it disrupts the equilibrium of interaction. People unconsciously seek relationships that feel balanced and sustainable. Oversharing distorts that balance. It signals to others that you may rely too heavily on them for emotional regulation, rather than fostering a dynamic of mutual support and exchange. Emotional intelligence is not simply the capacity to feel deeply, but the ability to gauge timing, context, and the needs of others when expressing that depth. One of the most telling signs of oversharing is the absence of pauses for reflection or response. You may be so focused on releasing your story that you fail to allow the listener to interject, relate, or offer perspective. Silence, which can be powerful and connective, is replaced by continuous disclosure. In effect, the conversation becomes a monologue, leaving the listener with little room to engage. Over time, this can generate subtle resentment or fatigue because the human brain is wired to prefer reciprocity and moderated engagement over constant emotional intensity. Managing oversharing is not about withholding who you are or pretending to be stoic. It is about cultivating awareness of emotional impact. Consider the principle of pacing. Share experiences and feelings in manageable portions, check for the listener's engagement, and invite dialogue rather than dumping emotion. Observe body language, tone, and verbal cues to gauge receptivity. Emotional intelligence is expressed not only in what you reveal, but in how you reveal it. The most magnetic communicators share in ways that build trust, curiosity, and mutual resonance, rather than creating emotional exhaustion. Another subtle but effective strategy is the art of framing. Instead of narrating events as a raw outpouring of emotion, contextualize them with reflection, insight, or lessons learned. This transforms disclosure into storytelling rather than venting, giving the listener a point of entry into your experience rather than leaving them to navigate unprocessed emotion. It also communicates maturity, self-awareness, and composure, qualities that inspire respect and trust. Oversharing also intersects with timing. Even truthful, meaningful details can overwhelm if delivered too early or without established rapport. Relationships evolve gradually, and emotional depth is best revealed with discretion. When you honor that natural pacing, your authenticity is preserved, but the risk of alienating others is minimized. You learn to navigate intimacy with subtlety and intelligence, rather than relying solely on raw disclosure. Oversharing is less about the content of what is said and more about the context and delivery. People respond not only to your words, but to the emotional footprint you leave behind. When that footprint feels heavy, uncontrolled, or one-sided, connection diminishes. By cultivating awareness, pacing, and reflection, you transform openness into a tool of attraction rather than repulsion. You become someone whose presence is sought, whose stories are valued, and whose emotional intelligence creates comfort rather than strain. It is the quiet mastery of measured vulnerability, the ability to be both real and considerate, that ensures your openness invites connection rather than resistance. Lack of listening is perhaps the most pervasive and insidious habit that erodes connection, yet it often goes unnoticed by the person committing it. In a world full of constant distractions, from phones to notifications to racing thoughts, true listening has become a rare skill. Many believe that participating in a conversation simply means speaking well or having interesting things to say, but the truth is that the act of listening, fully, without judgment or anticipation, is what communicates respect, attentiveness, and emotional intelligence. When you fail to listen, even subtly, you are sending a message that the other person's words, feelings, and presence are secondary to your own internal world. The psychology behind poor listening is rooted in self-centered focus. People who do not actively listen are often preoccupied with what they will say next, how they will be perceived, or how they can relate the conversation back to themselves. This mental preoccupation prevents them from being truly present. Neuroscience shows that human brains are wired to respond emotionally to feeling heard and understood. When someone's attention drifts or is divided, the emotional response is one of subtle rejection. They may smile or nod politely, but inwardly, they feel dismissed, undervalued, or even frustrated. Over time, these small cues accumulate and create an invisible wall between you and those you interact with. Lack of listening can manifest in countless ways, often so subtle that it escapes your own awareness. Checking your phone while someone speaks, interrupting to make your own point, or merely waiting silently for your turn to talk are all forms of disengagement. Even a wandering gaze or a distracted posture can communicate the same message. I am here physically, but my mind is elsewhere. To the listener, this can feel like a profound lack of care or interest. It is not enough to hear words. One must listen to the emotions, intentions, and nuances behind them. Failing to do so diminishes trust and makes interactions feel transactional rather than relational. The consequences of not listening go beyond social discomfort. Relationships, both professional and personal, rely on a foundation of mutual understanding. When someone does not listen, they undermine this foundation. Important cues, whether emotional, factual, or strategic, are missed. Miscommunications multiply. Subtle resentment grows. People may begin to avoid sharing meaningful thoughts with you, not because they dislike you personally, but because they no longer feel safe or valued in your presence. Listening is, in essence, a form of respect, and when it is absent, the relationship erodes quietly yet inexorably. Developing genuine listening is a practice of conscious awareness. It begins with stilling your own mind and resisting the urge to plan responses while someone else speaks. It requires observing not just words, but tone, body language, and underlying emotion. Emotional intelligence plays a critical role here. Understanding the difference between hearing facts and understanding feelings transforms ordinary conversation into meaningful connection. People are not just seeking information, they are seeking to be seen and validated. By truly listening, you acknowledge their experience and honor their humanity. Another aspect of listening is the willingness to tolerate silence. Often, we feel compelled to fill pauses, thinking that our words must always dominate. But silence is a powerful tool in communication. It gives the other person space to think, to feel, and to reveal more of themselves. It communicates patience, presence, and confidence. Those who master silence within conversations allow dialogue to unfold organically, rather than forcing it into premeditated patterns. The effect is subtle but profound. People feel genuinely attended to, not hurried or managed. Listening also requires feedback, but the right kind of feedback. Simple affirmations, reflective paraphrasing, or thoughtful questions signal that you are engaged and comprehending what is shared. They validate the other person's experience without redirecting the conversation toward your own agenda. Too often, people fail here because they confuse listening with passivity or lack of contribution. In reality, listening actively and responding appropriately strengthens rapport and fosters deep trust. Negative energy is one of those invisible forces that erodes relationships and quietly repels people, yet it is rarely addressed directly because it is so subtle and often unintentional. Unlike overt rudeness or aggression, negative energy seeps into conversations in nuanced ways, through tone, body language, microexpressions, and the content of what is communicated. It manifests as constant complaints, cynicism, judgment, or a tendency to fixate on worst-case scenarios. The person generating this energy might not recognize it in themselves because it feels natural, habitual, or even justified. But to others, it acts like a gravitational pull that drains enthusiasm, lowers morale, and diminishes the desire to engage further. Psychologically, humans are wired to be attuned to emotional cues in their environment. From a survival standpoint, detecting negativity allowed early humans to anticipate threats and respond accordingly. Today, this instinct translates into our social interactions. We subconsciously pick up on the emotional weight someone carries. When someone persistently emits negative energy, people instinctively distance themselves, not necessarily consciously, but because their emotional systems are seeking balance and protection. Even subtle forms of negativity, a sigh, an eye roll, or a fleeting tone of sarcasm, register at a deep level and influence how people perceive you. One common form of negative energy is the constant critique or complaint. Some people approach conversations as a platform for venting, often under the guise of honesty or authenticity. Yet when interactions repeatedly revolve around dissatisfaction, about coworkers, relationships, the weather, or the state of the world, the listener begins to associate you with discomfort rather than connection. This doesn't mean that expressing genuine concerns is inherently wrong. The distinction lies in the proportionality and purpose of the expression. Constructive dialogue that seeks solutions or mutual understanding is different from unfiltered negativity that amplifies frustration without resolution. Another element of negative energy is pessimism cloaked as realism. There is a subtle difference between pragmatic assessment and habitual focus on what could go wrong. People with this habit tend to undermine optimism or dampen enthusiasm, even unintentionally. Consider a scenario in which someone shares an idea or goal, and the immediate response is filled with doubt or cautionary statements. Even if framed rationally, repeated exposure to this energy signals that your presence is emotionally heavy and that your outlook lacks balance. Over time, people stop sharing openly because they anticipate critique rather than support. Negative energy also correlates strongly with emotional reactivity. Individuals who react impulsively, express irritation over minor setbacks, or display passive-aggressive behaviors create an environment of unpredictability and tension. Emotional control is not about suppressing feeling, but about managing expression in ways that communicate stability and composure. When your emotional state dominates a conversation, it shifts the focus away from the interaction itself and onto managing the energy you bring. This creates subtle psychological fatigue in those around you, even if they never explicitly confront it. Self-awareness is crucial in mitigating negative energy. Many people are unaware of how their habitual mood, tone, or expressions influence others. Reflection is key. Noticing patterns of complaint, frustration, or cynicism in your speech, and observing the reactions of others can reveal where negativity might be seeping through. Emotional intelligence allows you to recognize that your internal state is always communicating externally. By taking responsibility for the emotional footprint you leave, you regain control over how people experience your presence. There is also a physical and energetic component to negative energy. Body language, posture, and facial expressions carry emotional signals that often speak louder than words. Slouched shoulders, tight jaw muscles, or averted gaze broadcast disengagement, irritation, or discomfort. Even subtle changes in tone, a clipped response, a sigh, or a downward inflection convey negativity unconsciously. People do not just respond to your words, they respond to the energy behind them. Cultivating a grounded, centered presence where your external demeanor aligns with composure and calm dramatically reduces the negative signal you emit. Strategies to shift negative energy begin with conscious emotional regulation. Before entering a conversation, take a moment to assess your emotional state and the intention behind your words. Ask yourself if your communication builds the relationship or drains it. Mindfulness, controlled breathing, and self-reflection are simple yet powerful tools to modulate emotional tone. By doing so, you create space for more constructive dialogue, and others feel psychologically safe in your presence. Another powerful approach is reframing. Instead of emphasizing what is wrong or lacking, consciously highlight possibilities, solutions, or lessons learned. This does not mean forcing positivity or denying reality. It means presenting information with awareness of its emotional impact. The difference between a person who says, "This always goes wrong," and one who says, "This is challenging, but we can approach it differently," is immense. Both statements reflect truth, but only the latter fosters engagement, collaboration, and respect. It is also critical to recognize that negative energy is contagious. Just as joy, calm, and composure radiate outward, so does tension and frustration. People mirror emotional states subconsciously, so when you consistently emit negativity, you not only affect the immediate conversation, but the overall atmosphere of a social or professional environment. Conversely, when you cultivate calm, measured, and constructive energy, you inspire trust, collaboration, and openness. Emotional inauthenticity is one of the most subtle and corrosive habits in human interaction. It often goes unnoticed because it is rarely loud, abrasive, or overtly offensive. Yet, it quietly undermines trust, respect, and connection, leaving people uneasy or even repelled without fully understanding why. At its core, emotional inauthenticity is the gap between what you truly feel and what you express, the incongruence between your internal experience and your external communication. When people sense this mismatch, even unconsciously, it triggers an instinctive response: hesitation, distance, and skepticism. Humans are wired to detect authenticity. It is an evolutionary survival mechanism. When someone is emotionally inauthentic, the subconscious warning lights go off, and the brain begins to question whether it is safe to trust them. This habit manifests in numerous ways. It can appear as forced enthusiasm, artificial calm, disingenuous praise, or emotional manipulation. Often, it is subtle. A smile that doesn't reach the eyes, a tone of voice that contradicts the words being spoken, or an attempt to agree or sympathize without genuinely feeling it. While the intent may be to smooth over interactions, avoid conflict, or gain approval, the effect is often the opposite. People may initially respond politely, but over time, they sense the lack of genuine alignment between words and feeling, and the relational fabric weakens. Emotional inauthenticity does not build rapport. It erodes it, quietly and persistently. Psychologically, emotional inauthenticity is deeply tied to self-perception and fear. Many people adopt masks to protect themselves from judgment, vulnerability, or rejection. They may say what they think others want to hear or mimic behaviors they perceive as socially desirable. While this can provide short-term relief or superficial acceptance, it comes at a cost. Authenticity is a currency in human relationships, and once people sense a pattern of incongruence, trust diminishes. The brain registers subtle cues, micro-expressions, slight hesitations, or inconsistent body language, and the unconscious mind begins to categorize the person as unreliable or insincere. Trust is not built on appearances or clever words. It is built on congruence between inner truth and outward expression. One common example of emotional inauthenticity is the performative agreement. Someone might nod vigorously, express agreement verbally, or offer enthusiastic affirmation, while internally feeling disagreement, skepticism, or even discomfort. On the surface, the interaction seems harmonious, but the subtle dissonance creates tension. The listener may sense a lack of conviction or depth, even if they cannot pinpoint exactly why. Over repeated interactions, this creates distance. People naturally gravitate toward those whose expressions of emotion, opinion, and intent are consistent and trustworthy. Emotional inauthenticity, no matter how well-intentioned, sabotages that alignment. Another form of inauthenticity is emotional exaggeration, which is common in attempts to impress, influence, or gain attention. People sometimes amplify their reactions, laughter, excitement, concern, to create a particular impression. While outwardly engaging, this exaggeration signals to the subconscious mind that the individual may not be entirely transparent. Authenticity is nuanced, calm, and rooted in truth. Overstated expressions are inherently performative, and even if they are socially rewarded in the moment, they fail to cultivate lasting respect or genuine connection. People may enjoy the entertainment value, but they rarely feel deeply bonded with someone whose emotions feel constructed rather than lived. Emotional inauthenticity also manifests as avoidance, concealing feelings or failing to express truth when it matters most. Some individuals maintain a facade of neutrality or detachment, believing that withholding personal emotion will protect them or avoid conflict. While this may seem prudent, it communicates emotional distance. Authentic communication requires courage, the willingness to express feelings honestly, even when uncomfortable. When you suppress or mask your emotions consistently, relationships lack depth and intimacy. People may respect your composure or professionalism, but they will not feel genuinely connected. Over time, emotional invisibility creates subtle alienation. The antidote to emotional inauthenticity begins with self-awareness. You must first understand your own emotions, not just intellectually, but viscerally. Reflection, mindfulness, and honest self-inquiry allow you to identify the feelings driving your words and behaviors. Once you are aware of your internal state, you gain the ability to express it consciously. Emotional intelligence involves recognizing the difference between raw emotion and constructive expression. It requires asking yourself, am I communicating what I genuinely feel? Or am I performing to manage perception, avoid conflict, or seek validation? The distinction is profound, and awareness is the first step toward alignment. This requires quiet self-regulation, patience, and attentiveness. By balancing truthful self-expression with attentive listening, you cultivate interactions that feel safe, respectful, and resonant. People instinctively recognize authenticity, and they are naturally drawn to those whose presence is consistent and trustworthy. Emotional inauthenticity is also about long-term consistency. A single moment of incongruence may be overlooked, but patterns of disconnection are deeply perceptible. Over time, repeated misalignment between words and feelings signals unreliability or superficiality. Authenticity is not about perfection. It is about honesty, clarity, and integrity in communication. People forgive minor slips, but they cannot tolerate habitual performance that undermines trust. To cultivate lasting respect and influence, you must ensure that your emotional expression matches your internal state, consistently and consciously. Finally, the impact of emotional authenticity is transformative. When you speak and act from alignment with your true feelings, interactions feel effortless and profound. Trust is built without force. people naturally gravitate toward your presence. Even difficult conversations become opportunities for connection rather than conflict. Authenticity is magnetic because it conveys strength, self-awareness, and integrity. By shedding masks, embracing vulnerability, and regulating expression with composure, you communicate a deep, unspoken confidence, the confidence of someone who is at peace with themselves and respectful of others.